And one of your favourite segments every single week is Trending Now, and I'm joined as ever from Brisbane by social media commentator Daisy Cousens. Daisy, welcome to the show. What do you make of the government's suggestion that you might need 100 points of ID before you can get on social media?
Gosh, this is a pretty extraordinary proposal from the government, and thinking behind it is that somehow that's going to stop bullying and online trolls on social media. So sorry, but the idea that simply asking for a few points of ID is going to stop or lessen social media bullying is well-intentioned but completely misguided. I mean, the one thing that it might do is make it easier, say, to report abusers to the police. However, I don't think the risk for a gigantic privacy breach or a hacking, of which there is a risk, is actually worth that. And what people don't realise is that people are perfectly happy to troll and to bully people under their own names. It's not just anonymous accounts we're talking about here. There are people who brazenly troll and bully and belittle and humiliate people under their own names because they simply enjoy the attention. So if really the government wants to limit social media bullying, what they need to do is make social media companies enforce their own rules better than they do. I mean, there is a very clear set of terms and conditions that social media platforms have on what you can and can't say and what constitutes bullying and harassment, but they simply just do not seem to enforce it properly, considering what we see particularly on platforms like Twitter. So I think, Corey, that maybe platforms like Twitter and Facebook should spend less time banning conservatives, less time banning the sitting president of the United States, less time suppressing crucial election information like the Hunter Biden laptop story, and more focusing on actually weeding out trolls, identifying particularly vulgar, violent language, and focusing on making social media better that way. But the points of ID, sorry, well-intentioned, but probably not going to have the effect they wanted to.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It sounds very Orwellian to me. And of course, it arose out of a report into domestic violence and sexual abuse, so a very serious subject. But this is over-egging the pudding, and you make an excellent point. How can we trust social media giants, these tech tyrants? How can we trust them with all our 100 points of our ID? Do you think there'll be identity theft galore, given the looseness and laxness of their data security provisions? It's quite extraordinary. The other point I'd make here, Daisy, and it leads me on to what's happening in America, 100 points of ID to open a social media account, but you don't need any ID in this country, one of only a few really in the world, in order to vote. And that's, I think that's outrageous, but it's causing quite a stir in the states. Of course, Georgia want to implement identification requirements for voting, and 100 of the biggest company CEOs held an unprecedented telephone conference on Saturday to talk how they can push back against this terrible law when they all require ID to use their services, or many of them do. What do you make of the hypocrisy here?
Well, look, I think, Corey, this push against voter ID laws, not just in Georgia, but generally, the Americans have been having this debate for a long time. The reason that people give to oppose these laws is that apparently they are racist. And I've heard people saying that the Georgia laws are terrible white supremacist-driven things. Now, the thinking behind that is that somehow non-white voters are less capable of getting themselves an ID than white voters. Now, I'm sorry, Corey, but I think that is the most appalling bigotry of low expectations, and dare I say it, very akin to white supremacist thinking, that somehow the white race is more capable of doing something non-white races. It is just one of the many ways we see that, you know, woke ideology and racist ideology actually exist very much within the same universe. And aside from anything else, voter ID laws in the USA are popular. There was a recent poll by Rasmussen that found 75% of Americans, including 69% of Black Americans, actually support voter ID laws. Pardon me. But yes, big hypocrisy from the corporations and big bigotry of low expectations.
Yeah, that's very true. It's actually racist to presume that people are incapable of doing this when all of these businesses, if you want to hire a car, you want to get on a plane, you want to enrol in school, you've got to show identification. If you want to go and buy a beer in America, I've been carded in America to go and buy a beer, and I'm well past the age of majority over there. Maybe you're not, Daisy, but anyway, it's just terrible. And I tell you what else I think is...
You're very kind.
I tell it like it is, Daisy. I tell you what else I think is pretty appalling. Ramsay Street, that's in Victoria. It's the home of Neighbours. The show's been accused of racism, bad language, bad jokes, poor treatment of people of colour on set. I just wonder why it takes the end of a contract before anyone ever comes out against their former employer.
Yeah, this situation's pretty interesting. I mean, the actress who made the allegations, made this Facebook post alleging racism and misogyny, as you mentioned, after she'd finished her contract. But my understanding is that these issues were raised by her, and the company thought they were actually resolved during her time working on the show, to the point where she was actually allowed to bring an Indigenous elder on set with her and Auntie Diane, in order to ensure that cultural protocols were enforced. And the company, they even had a smoking ceremony to farewell her and the Indigenous elder when they finished their contract. So every effort was made here to resolve it. But for some reason, it doesn't seem quite enough for her. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's appropriate. And if she still had an issue with the company, perhaps she should have continued it privately with the company, rather than portraying it as if perhaps nothing or not enough was done.
Oh, Daisy, you've raised another can of worms there, because why do we need to have culturally appropriate elders and smoking ceremonies on the set of a television sitcom? Just extraordinary. The world seems to have gone a bit mad. Daisy Cousens, you are a voice of sanity in a crazy world. Thanks for joining me tonight. I do appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Corey.